Hello everyone, my name is Sage Nestler, MSW, and I am founder and CEO of Releasing the Phoenix, a queer mental health organization. I am also a horror scholar and critic, and I love connecting horror to mental health and social work concepts. Horror has always felt like a release for me, and I have a book coming out soon titled Horror Convalescence: Finding Healing Within the Macabre. The book incorporates my mental health work using horror through bibliotherapy with clients as well as myself. It also incorporates scientific insight in how horror impacts us emotionally and how it provides a largely untapped therapeutic tool for anxiety, trauma, and phobias. I am very excited today to be sharing with you a scholarly presentation and paper I have been working on called Gender, Sexuality, and the Queer Experience as Demonstrated Through Leatherface. So let's get started. When we refer to gender performativity, which is a vital part of queer theory, we are talking about the social performances of gender instead of a fixed identity. On the surface, Leatherface in the Pretty Woman mask from the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre movie brings in the context of him experimenting with gender identity, as well as his wearing the old lady mask. While the 1994 movie The Return of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre is a laughable aspect of the franchise, this movie also presented Leatherface's presumed genderqueer identity by presenting him in femme clothing and masks. Throughout the franchise, we see how Leatherface tries on different masks or faces of his victims. By doing so, he might be trying on different identities to experiment with his gender and explore how certain social performances connect to his sense of self as a presumed genderqueer folk. Set in a largely rural Texas area, it is safe to say that Leatherface doesn't have access or awareness of gender diverse and queer folks. His social circle is very small, and the influences he experiences all come from his family. As a character who generally doesn't talk, his gender expansive representation is famously seen through the Pretty Woman mask. The family also refers to his victims as dolls, which separates Leatherface's ability to see his victims as people. He is mocked by his family for playing with his dolls and wearing masks, but much like how children start to explore their identities through toys such as dolls or action figures, Leatherface has no other support or ability to explore his identity outside of his victims. By trying on different masks, Leatherface is able to explore his queer identity through experimentation. While later movies focused on Leatherface's facial deformities as the primary reason for his wearing masks, the original movie focused more on how different masks helped Leatherface conform to different situations, such as sitting down for dinner. When we talk about micro-influences, we are referring to direct influences a person has with other people and how these interactions impact them. Leatherface's main micro-influences are his family, especially his brothers. In the original movie, Leatherface is mocked by one of his brothers, who asks him if he likes this face when referring to one of the victims, who is female. He is also forced into being a butcher as part of the family cannibalistic meat business. The family business and the family are intertwined, and the pressures Leatherface experiences to conform impact his self-concept. On the macro level, which refers to the structures that influences our lives, including political, societal, economic, etc., Leatherface lives in a conservative rural setting. Paired with isolation by his family, he doesn't interact with anyone outside of his family or his victims. It is likely that Leatherface has never experienced queer folks or the queer community in any form. Struggling with his gender representation and his duties to his family play a significant part in how Leatherface's gender identity and sexuality are impacted. These influences mirror some of the queer experience by demonstrating how a lot of queer folks struggle at some point in their lives with their upbringing being detrimental to their experience as a queer person. They also mirror how the macro influences that impact the queer community contribute to trauma, identity concerns, as well as safety or lack thereof. As mentioned previously, Leatherface's family is the dominant power structure in his life, followed by the law, as seen by Sheriff Winston Hoyt in the remake, who is actually Leatherface's adoptive brother. This causes both power structures to be intertwined and more oppressive. Sheriff Winston Hoyt killed the original cop and assumed his role to protect the family from the law, since the law is intertwined with the Sawyer family, or the Hewitt family, as they are named in the remakes. Leatherface experiences further isolation and is essentially on his own to navigate his gender identity and sexuality, as well as his sense of self. When applying systems theory, we can see how Leatherface is in a system that has rigid, closed boundaries. As mentioned, he only has social interactions with his family and victims. He also lives in a poor family that was impacted by the local meat plant closing and was raised in a rural landscape diminished by poverty. To maintain stability within his family, Leatherface learned that he would only be accepted by his family if he submitted to becoming a violent character who is part of the family's cannibalistic lifestyle. This is an unhealthy pattern, but one driven by a need for safety. Trauma appears to have had a detrimental ongoing impact on him. Experiencing bullying by his brothers and coercion by his family members, even his mother, as seen in the remake, who appears to love and protect him but is part of the coercion, produces a feedback loop where Leatherface consistently leans into his violent behavior as a longing for his family's approval. After looking at all of these influences and tying them together, we can see how Leatherface's identity is impacted by living in a rural and conservative setting, where he's bullied by his brothers and coerced into violence to serve the family's lifestyle. He also grapples with his sense of self by experimenting with the faces of his victims or dolls, and the question of him being genderqueer is presented by his wearing masks of female victims. Through social learning theory, Leatherface learned his behaviors directly from his family due to his inability to interact with others beyond his victims. His violence contributes to wanting to remain accepted and an essential part of his family, while also grappling with his identity and shifting gender expression. Leatherface's experience across the franchise, but particularly in the original movie and remakes, is one example of queer identity and expression. Living in a rural, conservative setting paired with a violent and abusive family leads Leatherface to adopt violent behaviors as a way to remain within his family's good graces. While being mocked by his brothers for his masks, particularly female ones, he experiences prejudice due to this gender expression. Familial trauma is unfortunately common within the queer community, while Leatherface's experience is an exaggerated example of coercion, acceptance based on who the family forces him to be, and experimenting with gender through the use of human masks. It touches on how our immediate and surrounding environment influence our sense of self and our ability or inability to be who we are as queer folks. Leatherface has been seen by a lot of queer folks as a unintended queer icon, and while his story shifts across the franchise, including backstories such as the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, the beginning, and Leatherface, there is a consistent role where Leatherface is continually trying to grapple with his identity while serving his family, while being impacted by poverty and living in a rural area, and all of the anger and violence that goes into being failed by the system, which is more relevant than ever. It is also safe to say that Leatherface, because he has no connection to any queer community, gender diverse people, he has had to explore his own identity through the only way he knows how, and that is through his victims, because of the ridicule he has experienced by his family, other than his mother in the remake, who is actually his adoptive mother and is protective of him. Leatherface is often seen as not one of the most popular horror icons. He happens to be my favorite, but his story, his role in his family and in this setting, and his experience being different not only as an assumed gender diverse person, but also having the coded concepts of having developmental disabilities or being neurodivergent, I really resonated with as a neurodivergent folk. And it's important to understand how, because of all these influences that Leatherface experiences, and because he's a largely silent character and only in some of the movies does he make noises or sounds, he never fully talks. So we have to examine Leatherface through his actions, specifically wearing the masks, his role within the family, his violent behavior, and also how in the remakes he is seen as having some distress surrounding the violence that is happening to these victims. So Leatherface as an unintended queer icon is important to acknowledge, and how a lot of people within our queer community experience familial trauma, which is part of Leatherface's story, and also how for a lot of us it takes time to kind of explore how we feel and who we are, and how it might contradict to our upbringing and who we are told to be and how we are raised. And Leatherface is the perfect example of that. Thank you for listening to my presentation, and look out for my book, Horror Convalescence, Finding Healing Within the Macabre, which is coming soon. I am also working on programs within my queer mental health organization that will be groups, one-on-one, and self-led programs utilizing horror as a healing mechanism in a safe environment and format. If you would like to learn more about me and about that, please visit my website, releasingthephoenix.org. Thank you.